Story number 1, Dock Reservation. I got to the marina office at 6:30 in the morning. The gate padlock was hanging open, already cut through. I remember thinking that was odd, but the season had just started, and there's always a little chaos the first day. I figured maybe one of the dock hands had come in early to prep the slips. The office smelled like diesel fuel and something else underneath it. That thick rotting algae smell from the winter stagnation. I hadn't been here since December 23rd. The building was cold when I unlocked the door. There was a man standing by the window. 50s, maybe. Weathered face. He had a duffel bag at his feet. "I've been waiting," he said. "I have a slip reservation. B17. I told him I'd be happy to help, but I'd need to check the system. The website had migrated over the winter, and we'd lost some bookings in the transfer. It happened. I was already thinking about how to handle the refund or rebook him. I pulled up the digital system on my computer. Nothing under B17 for this week or next. I asked for his name, Gerald Hoffner, he said. I typed it in. Nothing came up at all. I told him we might have his information in the paper files from before the upgrade. I kept meticulous records. Everything was in the filing cabinet. While I was looking, he started describing the dock. He said B17 was the slip closest to the fuel station, that the dock had a slight list to the west, that the water had been dark that winter. He mentioned the old pump house that we'd relocated in February. He knew about the relocation. He knew we'd moved it. I found myself pausing. I didn't want to seem rude, but I was trying to remember if I'd mentioned any of that to him. I hadn't. I was sure I hadn't. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos. They were printed, old-looking. The images showed the inside of my office, my desk, the back storage room where we keep the slip contracts, and the old logbooks. One photo showed the jacket I'd left hanging on the hook by the bathroom door over Christmas break. The timestamp read January 15th. The office had been locked and alarmed the entire winter. No one had been inside. I felt something shift in my chest. I was trying to rationalize it. Maybe he'd been here before, taken photos some other time. Maybe the timestamps were wrong. People don't know how to set timestamps correctly. But I could see my jacket in the photo, the same jacket, the one I was looking at right now, still hanging in the same spot. He was standing between me and the door. "I need to check the paper files," I said. I meant it to sound normal, but it came out thin. I went to the filing cabinet. My hands felt strange. I opened the H section. There was a contract there. Gerald Hoffner, slip B17. The contract was dated 2 years ago. It was a legitimate booking. But Gerald Hoffner had died. I remembered because I'd had to call his family in November to ask about the slip. He'd had a heart attack at his house. His son had come to collect his things from the slip in December. The man was still standing there. He was calm. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a boat registration card. He slid it across the desk toward me. The name was Gerald Hoffner. The registration was for slip B17. I locked myself in the bathroom and radioed Harbor Patrol. My hands were shaking. I told them I needed someone at the marina immediately. I didn't explain why. I could hear him in the office, opening and closing drawers. Not searching. Opening them methodically, like he knew exactly where everything was. The drawer that held the slip contracts. The drawer with the seasonal rental agreements. The drawer with the master keys. I waited in the bathroom. I could hear him moving through the office like he owned it. Like he'd been here 100 times. Maybe he had. When I heard the patrol boat's engine, I climbed out the bathroom window. The ground was still soft from the thaw. I could see my own footprints in the mud as I ran toward the dock office, where the patrol officer was already walking up from the water. When we went back into the marina office, it was empty. The filing cabinet was open, the H section. Gerald Hoffner's physical contract was gone. There were wet boot prints on the floor. They led from the bathroom window back toward the slips, toward B-17. There was a boat at B-17, a 30-foot cabin cruiser. I didn't recognize it. I'd been here every day before the winter closure, and I would have remembered a boat like that. The patrol officer radioed for backup and followed the boot prints to the water. The boat was locked. No one was inside, as far as we could see through the windows. The registration numbers matched. It was registered to Gerald Hoffner. The registration was current. They found nothing else. No sign of forced entry to the office beyond the cut padlock. No sign of the man. I still don't know how he got the photos from January. I don't know how he knew about the dock relocation, or the slip list, or where I kept my jacket. I don't know whose boat is sitting at B-17, or where Gerald Hoffner's family thinks his boat is now. What I know is that the boat is still there. It's been there for 3 weeks. The registration is valid. The slip fees are paid through the end of the season. Sometimes I see someone moving on the boat in the early morning. Just a shape behind the cabin windows. I've stopped coming in before 7 o'clock. Story number 2, Campground host. I took the job because I needed work, and seasonal ranger positions don't come around often in Central Oregon. The park had closed for 3 months after the fire swept through in late August. By November, they'd cleared the main roads and decided to reopen the campground. I was hired to monitor the sites and manage the reopening checklist. Simple work. Low stakes. I thought it would be straightforward. The first thing I noticed when I arrived was the smell. Acrid. Sharp. The charred pine hung in the air, even though most of the burned timber had been cleared. It got into my clothes, my hair, the cabin. I kept the windows open anyway, because the alternative was sitting in that smell with no ventilation. I spent my first 2 days walking the perimeter, checking the sites, making sure the infrastructure was sound. The campground was empty except for me. The silence was almost complete. Just wind through the trees and the occasional bird. I didn't mind it. On my 3rd day, I found the tent. It was in Site 7, one of the more remote ones, set up with precision. The kind of setup that takes planning. Tent stakes perfectly level, guy lines taut. The whole structure oriented to catch morning sun. There was camping gear inside visible through the mesh window. A sleeping bag, a backpack, a lantern hanging from the center pole. Everything arranged like someone had thought about it. The closure signs were still up. The park wasn't officially open for another 3 days. I called out. Nothing. I called again. Still nothing. The tent was zipped shut. I waited about 5 minutes, then left a violation notice on the stake and hiked back to my cabin. I told myself the person probably hadn't seen the signs. It happens. They'd show up eventually and I'd explain the situation. No big deal. I checked back that afternoon. The tent was still there, still empty, still perfectly maintained. The violation notice was still on the stake, untouched. I didn't see any footprints or signs of recent movement. It was like the tent was just sitting there, waiting. The next morning I hiked back out. The violation notice was gone. But the tent was still there, still zipped, still empty. And now there was a cooler outside it. A blue Coleman cooler with the lid closed. I opened it carefully. Inside were groceries, a loaf of bread, cheese, some deli meat, a carton of milk. All fresh. The milk was still cold. I stood there for a long time looking at that cooler. The rational part of my brain was trying to work through it. Someone had come in the night, set up the tent, left groceries. But I'd walked the perimeter yesterday. I'd checked the access roads. I hadn't seen a vehicle. I hadn't heard anything. I walked around the site slowly, looking at the ground. The ash from the fire was still thick in places, undisturbed. I didn't see fresh footprints around the tent. But when I walked back toward my cabin, I noticed something else. Footprints in the ash, a circle around my cabin, multiple passes. The prints were deep, like whoever made them had been walking slowly, deliberately, looking at something, or looking for something. I called the main ranger station. I explained the situation. The supervisor told me to document everything and wait. He said that technically, if the person wasn't causing damage or blocking access, there wasn't an immediate violation. He told me to keep notes and call back if anything escalated. Then he hung up. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about those footprints circling my cabin. I kept thinking about someone moving around in the dark, close enough that I should have heard them. I told myself it was probably just someone checking out the area, being cautious. People do that sometimes. They scout a place before committing to camping. But that didn't explain the groceries. That didn't explain why someone would set up a tent, stock it with food, and then disappear. The next morning I set up a trail camera. I mounted it on a tree between my cabin and Site 7, angled to catch both locations. I used my own equipment, something I'd bought years ago for wildlife documentation. I checked the batteries. They were good. I set it to continuous recording and made sure it was hidden well enough that someone wouldn't immediately spot it. That night I didn't sleep in the cabin. I parked my truck about 100 yards away, facing the cabin and the campground. I left the radio on low volume and kept my flashlight within reach. I told myself I was being cautious. I told myself it was probably a simple explanation. I told myself that whatever this was, it wasn't dangerous. It was just strange. I woke up 3 times that night. Each time I scanned the area with my flashlight. Each time I saw the same thing. The tent still zipped. The cabin dark and empty. The ash-dusted ground, undisturbed. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. In the morning, I checked the trail camera. The footage was time-stamped. I scrolled through the night. Nothing for hours. Then at exactly 3 in the morning, my cabin lights came on. All of them. Every light in the cabin turned on simultaneously. The footage was clear. The lights were definitely on. I could see them glowing through the windows. Then, at 3:07 in the morning, they turned off. All at once. Darkness again. I watched the footage 5 times. I looked for a person approaching the cabin. I looked for movement near the breaker box. I looked for anything that would explain how the lights turned on and off. The camera caught nothing. No one appeared on screen. No one approached the cabin from any angle. The lights just turned on, and then they turned off. My hands were shaking. I told myself there was a logical explanation. A timer, a malfunction, something electrical. But I knew my cabin. I knew there was no timer. I knew there was no automatic system. And I knew I'd checked the breaker box before I left. It was fine. I called the main station again. I told them what I'd found. The supervisor said he'd send someone out the next day. He told me to stay in my vehicle. He told me not to approach the tent or the cabin. He said it was probably just someone playing a prank, but he wanted to be safe. He told me to keep the radio on and call immediately if anything else happened. Nothing else happened that night. I sat in my truck with the radio on and waited for dawn. The next morning, before the other ranger arrived, I hiked back to Site 7 one last time. I needed to see if the tent was still there. I needed to know if anything had changed. The tent was gone. Completely gone. No trace of it except for the circle of footprints in the ash. The same circle I'd seen around my cabin. The prints were deep and deliberate, like someone had been walking in a slow, measured pattern. They didn't lead anywhere. They just circled the empty space where the tent had been, and then they stopped. I requested an immediate transfer that day. The supervisor approved it. I spent my last night parked at the main station, about 20 miles away. I didn't go back to the cabin. I didn't want to see if the lights turned on again. I never found out who set up that tent. I never found out who left the groceries or walked circles around my cabin in the dark. I never found out who turned on my lights at 3 in the morning. The other ranger who came out that morning found the same thing I did. An empty site. Footprints. Nothing else. I think about it sometimes. I think about what would have happened if I'd stayed in the cabin that night. I think about what would have happened if I'd confronted whoever it was. I think about those lights turning on in the dark, one by one, like someone was moving through my home and flipping switches. I don't work in parks anymore. Story number 3, Pool Key. I got the call about Magnolia Gardens on a Thursday afternoon in late May. The pool was scheduled to open the following Monday, and they needed someone from the office to do the final walkthrough. I'd been transferred to the leasing department 3 weeks earlier, moved from the corporate side, so I was still learning the properties. This one was suburban Atlanta, all brick garden apartments arranged in 3-story blocks around a central courtyard with a pool. The humidity hit me first when I pulled into the parking lot. The kind of thick, wet heat that makes you feel like you're breathing through a towel. I walked toward the pool area with my clipboard, already sweating through my blouse. The gate was unlocked. That was the first thing I noticed. It should have been locked, chained even, but the padlock was hanging open on the fence. I pushed through and the smell of chlorine hit my throat immediately. Sharp, chemical, almost caustic. They'd already treated the water. The pool sat empty and clean, the concrete around it still wet from a recent cleaning. The gate lock was the kind that required a specific key. Nothing special. I made a note to have maintenance check the mechanism and locked it properly before I left. The office was in the main building, a small room with filing cabinets and a desk. I was reviewing the pool access list when a woman came in around 4 o'clock. She was in her 40s, blonde hair pulled back, wearing casual clothes. She seemed calm, almost rehearsed in the way she approached the counter. She said she needed a replacement pool key. She gave me the name Jessica Brennan and the unit number. 205. I pulled the file without thinking much about it. Jessica Brennan had been a tenant here, that was true. She'd moved out 3 months ago. The file showed she'd requested a forwarding address. I was about to explain that I'd need to verify the request through the property manager when the woman started talking about Jessica's routine, how she always swam in the early mornings, usually around 6:30, how she preferred the deep end, how she always wore a blue swim cap. The specificity of it caught me. I remember pausing with my hand still on the file. It was the kind of detail you don't just know about someone unless you've watched them, unless you've been paying attention. But I told myself it was probably a friend or a family member who visited. The sublease paperwork might not have been filed yet. These things happen. I issued her a temporary key, and she thanked me and left. The interaction took maybe 5 minutes. That evening, I was in my apartment on the second floor, Unit 2, 13, eating dinner and thinking about nothing in particular. I decided to check Jessica Brennan's forwarding address in the system, just to be thorough. I had my laptop open with the property database. The address was 203 Magnolia Gardens, the apartment directly below mine. I stared at that for a long time. 203. That didn't make sense. If Jessica had moved out 3 months ago, why would her forwarding address be another unit in the same complex? I pulled up the current tenant information for 203. A man named David Cho had lived there for 2 years. 2 years. Before Jessica even moved in, I told myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe the address was outdated. Maybe it was a data entry error. I closed the laptop and tried to watch television, but I kept thinking about how that woman had described Jessica's swimming routine. The blue swim cap. 6:30 in the morning. Around 11:30 that night, I heard a sound outside. Metal on metal. Scraping. It was coming from the direction of the pool area. I went to my window and looked out into the courtyard. The pool was lit by the security lights, and I could see someone at the gate. It was the same woman from earlier. She was trying keys. Different keys, one after another, methodically testing each one on the lock. She'd try one, wait a moment, then move to the next. She did this for maybe 3 minutes, and then she stopped and looked up. She looked up at the apartments, at the windows, like she was checking if anyone was watching. I stepped back from the window. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I told myself she might be a resident. She might have forgotten her key. But residents don't try multiple keys like that. Residents have one key. I took a photo of her through the window, zoomed in as much as I could. The image was grainy, but it was her, same woman. Then I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher asked me what I thought was happening. I told her someone was trying different keys on the pool gate at night. She said she'd send someone out. I stayed at the window and watched. The woman tried the gate one more time, then she just walked away. She moved back into the complex, disappearing between the buildings. The police showed up 20 minutes later, but by then there was nothing to see. The next morning, I changed the pool locks myself. I had maintenance bring in new ones, different keys entirely. Then I went downstairs to 203 and knocked on the door. David Cho answered. He was in his 50s, wearing a work shirt. I asked him if he'd ever heard of Jessica Brennan. He said no. I asked if he'd ever received mail for anyone else at that address. He said no, just his own mail. He looked confused and a little concerned. I apologized for bothering him and left. That evening, I installed a chain lock on my apartment door. Just an extra precaution. The next morning, when I left for work, I noticed wet footprints in the hallway outside my door. They led from the stairs toward my apartment, and they smelled like chlorine. I've checked the property database every day since then. Jessica Brennan's forwarding mail still comes to the office. Nobody ever picks it up. The woman hasn't come back to the pool, at least not that I've seen. The police said they couldn't find any evidence of anything actually happening, nothing stolen or damaged. They said maybe she was just confused about her key. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that forwarding address didn't make sense. I still don't know what it means. I still don't know who that woman was or what she wanted. I just know that I changed the locks, and I keep my door chained, and every time I hear a sound in the hallway at night, I hold my breath and wait for it to pass.